One of the reasons we felt that research into risk culture was really important was to get below the hype and find out exactly what it was that organizations were doing or trying to do in response to pressures from regulators and others to improve their risk cultures. So on the one hand, there was, if you like, a moral panic in society, creating enormous pressures on financial institutions. And we wanted to see how that moral panic was being transmitted into organizations and responded to. Risk culture is a rather amorphous kind of thing. So if you're suddenly told one day that you've got to improve it, many practitioners were scratching their heads and say, what do we do? So I think that ambiguous nature of the task was what made social scientists like us very, very interested in seeing what was going on and getting to know more.
Risk culture could be seen as a symptom of something else. So in this sense, academically trying to unpack what risk culture is, what are the main drivers, what are the dynamics, so how it could change over time becomes interesting because it might help us to understand what are the underlying mechanisms that have facilitated big problems and disruptions in the financial sector. The main interesting dynamic that we were able to capture thanks to our longitudinal engagement with organizations was an interesting dynamic where the people we interacted with, initially they were very keen to develop what we called an organic approach to the management of risk culture, where you have some key people within the organization that try to get a feel for what potential pressure points or potential issues within the organization. And this could be done in a number of ways, including just walking around and interacting with people, or collecting ad hoc data such as, for example, information about staff turnover, which, if it's very high, could be indicative of some issues.
Over time, organizations and the people we spoke to found that these approaches were less satisfactory to boards and regulators who wanted proof, measurable proof, that something was being done and something was being changed. There was this transition from an initial, if you like, attraction towards anthropological approaches to culture, and then that drifted away to, if you like, the harder measurable end of accounting for culture.
We are really interested to kind of develop a comparison with settings where risk is very real. So what we did was we looked at safety culture and what was being done in a large airline. What was important and what was interesting to see was how there was a strong narrative to develop what they call a just culture, which basically means that if something goes wrong and you didn't follow procedures or guidelines, then there will be consequences. However, if you follow procedures and guidelines and something went wrong, there might be a number of good reasons why that has happened, and therefore there should be no penalty for that. But the important bit is that this was not just happening on its own, but it was corroborated by an important focus on collecting and storing as much data as possible. But essentially the idea was that any member of staff should really focus on trying to report as much information as they could. All sorts of different kinds of data were combined into one system, and then there were people that were trying to kind of understand whether there were some important anomalies or patterns in the data that could help to prevent potential issues. So the important insight here was not just this strong narrative about what a good culture is, but also the way in which this was hardwired into technology and data reporting systems. So this research, I think, shows how qualitative research is really important. That's how you can see what people are doing in the field and develop a good understanding of the problematics, how they try to solve them. So as part of the research, we developed a set of what we call quote-unquote smart questions. There are very simple questions that people, well, senior managers could ask themselves just to get a quick understanding of whether there might be something that is not quite right within the organization. And one example is for a senior executive, how many times did you meet with your chief risk officer in the last week? If you met 0 times, well, then maybe there is a problem. If you met 100 times, there's also possibly an issue. So just asking these kind of questions might help you to raise awareness about whether there's something that is coming up within the organization that could be potentially problematic.
I think one of the big implications for society is the whole idea of risk awareness, of being fully aware of the risk appetite in organizations. And certainly since the financial crisis, the risk appetite discussion is really central to that. In other words, how much risk are you prepared to take as an organization, and what controls are you putting in place to manage that risk? That is now a much more mature and explicit discussion. And that's very important for society, because society, through the capital markets, places trust in private sector organizations to take risk. We want societies to take risk. That's how they thrive and develop. But if those risks are uncontrolled or reckless, then the damage caused by very, very large organizations, the damage is immense. And so it really matters to society that there are mature risk cultures, which at the center of which there is risk-taking, knowledgeable and aware risk-taking. These are not just technical issues that sit in the financial services sector, but this whole question of risk culture is societal-wide.